not join but did ask to see the slides and recording can get that as we're done. And the chat transcript will be sent out later today or early tomorrow morning. And the slides and where I got all this data will all be available for you guys to use. And yeah, and I'll stop periodically and ask for questions and comments as we shift topics. And our last webinar, and now Google did automatically mute everyone's microphone, so please use the chat box. And if your microphone is not muted, please do mute it. It really does help everyone else and to have an enjoyable meeting experience. So thanks for using the chat box again to introduce yourselves. Let's get started. So my name is Caitlin Failer. I'm a senior economist at Research and Planning. I've been here 4 years, and I studied economics and geology in college, and I started my career in uranium mining, somehow wound up here, and it's been a lot of fun. Oh, oops. It's been a lot of fun. I'm curious about everything. And for me, fun is making complicated data more easily accessible to busy people. And I know information and data can be overwhelming. And in this presentation, I want to empower you to ask questions and seek the answers that you need that are best for your organization. At Research and Planning, we are an exclusively statistical agency. We don't run any programs out of our office. Our funding isn't tied up in how well a program works, so we can more honestly evaluate it. And a lot of our office's funding is federal. We use chiefly surveys and administrative data being the gold standard of data collection. And I'm here to help you get the information that you need to make the best decisions for you and your organization. Today we're going to cover 3 big questions, the first of which being, how do we make projections? And if you know where data comes from, you can more easily make decisions surrounding that data, and you get the right information for the right circumstances. For example, you've got to know where your neighbor is getting their weather forecast from if you're going to use that information to decide whether or not to wear snow boots. So really important to know where your data is coming from. We're also going to talk about how Wyoming's projected growth compares to other states and how we can use this information to make decisions about recruitment, training, and wages. So first, we're going to have a quiz though. And we did this back in January in another webinar, and it was a lot of fun. It's really easy. There's no registration, nothing to download. Go to kahoot.it on your smartphone or open a small browser window. I promise this will be fun. It's good. It's a good community builder. It helps break down our own assumptions about how stuff works so we can take out the old information and put in new, better information. So if y'all could go to kahoot.it and go ahead and enter this game pin. The game pin at kahoot.it is 2333867. And just go to kahoot.it and use your smartphone, nothing to download. You can put your name if you want to. You can put your favorite Halloween candy. You can make up a name. If there's something inappropriate, though, I'm going to click and you're not going to be able to play with us. But glad to see 6-7 players now joining at kahoot.it. And the game pin is 2333867. And hey, Butterfingers, candy corn. I really find that's hilarious. That can't possibly be your favorite. You're just telling me that. Good that we've got a whole bunch of people joining us. Super, 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 super. Kahoot.it, the game pin 2333867. Okay, just another minute. We will get started with our quiz questions. This is a lot of fun. Okay, I think we're all here, and this game pin will still be available. You'll still be able to see it if you're just joining us. So, to get started, there's 6 questions for understanding and using employment projections in Wyoming. And the first is, from 2017 to 2019, employment in Wyoming is projected to And there's three options. Red triangle, grow faster than most other states and territories. Blue diamond, grow but slower than most other states and territories. And the yellow circle is decline. We've got 6, 7, 8 answers. Everybody's almost there. 10 seconds left. And three options: grow faster than most other states, grow but slower than other states, or decline. In 3, 2, 1. And the correct answer is grow faster than most other states and territories, tied with grow but slower than most other states and territories. And a couple people said decline. So I see you pessimists out there, but actually, Wyoming is tied for 19th in terms of the projected relative or percent change for the 50 states and territories that make employment projections. The total number of jobs that may be smaller in Wyoming, because Wyoming is a smaller state to begin with, but the percent change overall is tied for 19th with Idaho. And it's not really fair to compare one state's total to another. It's not really the right candy apples to candy apples comparison. So we are on kahoot.it. And if you are just joining us, go ahead and use your smartphone or open a small browser window and go to kahoot.it. Enter the game pin that you see at the bottom, 2333867. Our next question, question number 2 of 6. Oh, we've got Mary. Mary is ahead, and followed by B, then Pepper, Butterfingers, and Darnell. I'm glad you guys are participating. This is a lot of fun. Our second question is: when creating projections, research and planning uses background information dating back to red triangle 1990, blue diamond the last 5 years, yellow circle the last year, green square the last 10 years. We have a few more people. About half our time is up. 15 seconds left. Go ahead and select your answer. Faster you answer, the more points you get. And 5 seconds. Couple more. Anyone? Okay, the correct answer is 1990. We had a few people say the last 10 years. I'm glad nobody said the last year. That would be, as we're going to see later, just very skewed projections if we only used 1 year of data. And we take into account as much history we can when we're doing projections. Prior to 1990, though, data was not consistently and uniformly collected, made it a lot more difficult to use. But 30 years, almost 30 years of data is a lot. And it's kind of cool. You think like, oh, I know somebody born in 1990, and it turns out they're almost 30, and then you feel really old. It's okay. We're all in this together. Sarah is at the top, followed by Butterfingers and Darnell. I'm glad you guys are participating. We're going to move on to our third question at kahoot.it. Which Wyoming industry is projected to grow the fastest from 2017 to 2019? Red triangle, none of these. Blue diamond, the nursing assistant industry. Yellow circle, the welding industry. Green square, federal, state, and local government. It's really awesome that you guys are all answering. About 10 seconds left. Go ahead, select an answer. Super, super. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the correct answer is none of these. I really like that though, because this gives us a good opportunity to discuss the difference between industry and occupation. And it's a tricky question. To answer this question, you had to know that there's a difference between industry and occupation. And welders and nursing assistants, for instance, are jobs. And welders often work for companies that manufacture things or for oil and gas companies. Nursing assistants often work for assisted living companies or in hospitals. And the other incorrect answer was in Wyoming, federal, state, and local government. Public administration has been declining for some time, and it's not expected to change. Public administration and information were the only industries projected to decline in Wyoming from 2017 to 2019. So you out of Sears might not have known that. I'll give you a free pass. But the correct answer that most people didn't get was none of these. So moving on to our next question. Thanks for playing. Sarah, great job. Butterfingers, Butterfingers, Darnell, you guys are falling behind. So if you want to stay up there, you got to answer as quickly as possible. For question 4, most job openings come from a growing need in the economy for that occupation. true or false. Just 2 answers here. You have a 50% chance of getting it correct. So I would say those odds are pretty good. If I had a 50% chance of winning the lottery, I might play a lot more, but as it happens, I don't play at all. So most openings come from a growing need in the economy for that occupation. True or false? 10 seconds, 9, 8, 7. Go ahead, give us an answer. Make sure you mute your microphone if you are just joining us. And the correct answer is false. Most jobs do not come from a growing need in the economy for that occupations, and there are some exceptions, but most job openings come from people switching out of an occupation or leaving the workforce for, say, retirement. There's definitely gone are the days when people entered one type of job and stayed that way from their youth until their retirement. And considering the reasons that people leave their job can have major implications for workforce planning. So the correct answer is false, and it's false by quite a bit, and we're going to talk about that later too. Great job, Sarah. You are really killing it. Butterfingers, Darnell, come on. Got to answer some questions. So question 5. Research and Planning does not publish short-term industry and occupational projections for counties. Why? Red triangle, statewide projections apply equally to all counties. So basically you just take the statewide projections, divide by 23, that's your county. The blue diamond, our crystal ball broke and can't be fixed due to budget cuts. I like that answer. Yellow circle, small sample sizes make county projections unreliable. 16, 17, 18 answers, and 3, 2, 1. Very good. That's awesome. You guys, that's good. Small sample sizes make county projections unreliable. And it does not mean that you should ignore data that you have or county level data that you have or ignore what you observe and you know to be true. But it does mean that you do have to work with what you've got. And you don't get short-term industry and occupational projections by county in Wyoming. Don't waste your time looking for them because they don't exist. So, next question. Great job, Sarah. Good job, everybody. Let's try and keep up. I'm not sure anybody's going to beat Sarah. We just have 1 or 2 questions left. It's our last question. Employment projections are a direct estimate of training needs. True or false? True or false? Employment projections are a direct estimate of training needs. This is our last question in our quiz, and I'm really hoping you guys come through for me on this. Just about half our time left. True or false? 50% chance of getting this answer correct if you just play the game on your smartphone at kahoot.it. It's a lot of fun. Do this a lot for some good stuff. That's right. Everyone got this one. Employment projections are not a direct estimate of training needs. It's false. This is definitely false. Very much definitely false. And we're going to talk a lot about this, but saying there will be 24 more substitute teaching jobs in 2019 says nothing about the amount of substitutes already looking for a job. And organizing training is way more complicated, as you guys clearly do understand. So we have Sarah as our winner, followed by Deke and Darnell. I really appreciate you guys playing. I hope you guys had at least a little bit of fun. We're going to get back to the presentation now and cover some of the stuff that we talked about in more detail. Again, so if you guys have questions, do use the chat box. I am keeping an eye on it. So now that we are warmed up, let's cover our first topic, which is how we make projections. First, we need to talk about the difference between industry and occupation. To sum it up, an occupation is how you make money. An industry is how your company makes money. And for example, someone who works as a welder, who has the occupation of a welder, and welding is their job, makes money by joining together 2 pieces of metal. A welder can work for many different types of companies, and the company may make money as a refinery in the oil and gas industry, in the construction industry, or in nuclear power generation, or in manufacturing. And wages are often very different for industries. And this applies to any job. So welding, nursing assistants, or if you are the butcher, the baker, or the candlestick maker, it all applies. that's an occupation, not an industry. And I think that butcher, baker, and candlestick maker would all make a great group Halloween costume. So there you go. If you guys are desperately looking for a group Halloween costume, it's that one. Um, Moving right along, industry and occupation are classified by 6-digit codes. They are distinct codes. They are not related. Imagine there are there's like a code for Halloween costumes and there is a code for Halloween candy. Same holiday, but completely different things to remember to make or buy. And the first 2 digits of both categories of both codes are very broad. Imagine for if there was a Halloween costume code, the first digits would represent things that are dead, fictional characters, internet memes. And in industry, the first 2 digits represent things like mining, healthcare and social assistance, and accommodation and food service. Now, imagine for Halloween candy, the first 2 digits represent things like candy with chocolates, gelatin based chewable sweets, and things you should not give to trick or treaters like pennies. Occupations can be classified very similarly as well. There are healthcare practitioners and technical occupations, food preparation and serving related occupations, and construction and extraction occupations. And these two systems are not related. There is definitely not a welding industry or a nursing assistant industry. Things in both categories, too, can get pretty specific in both industry and occupation, just like my imaginary candy classification code can get pretty specific from candy with chocolate in it to candy with chocolate that has stuff in it to things like Kit Kats, and then even further like original Kit Kat, jumbo Kit Kat, mini Kit Kat, apple Kit Kat, sake Kit Kat, soy sauce Kit Kats, all things that actually exist in Japan. If anyone has ever been, I have not, and I'm not sure that I want to taste a soy sauce Kit Kat. Possibly pass. It's too much to include all of these numbers in the slides, but if you check out the slide notes and the slide comments after I send them out at the end of the presentation, you can go and reference everything that you find in here on your own. And I do my best to make sure that you can use this presentation to do the research that you need for your organization. Research and planning makes projections by both industry and occupation, and we definitely make industry and occupation projections, but there are other categories for our projections as well. There are short-term or 2-year projections and long-term or 10-year projections. And as we discussed in our Kahoot, we don't make short-term sub-state or county projections, but we do publish long-term sub-state projections for occupations. At the statewide level, we publish long-term industry and occupational projections, but our focus today is going to be on short-term statewide occupational projections. So Tiffany, I haven't checked out that link, but I do appreciate you sharing resources with us in the chat box. If anybody else has questions, it's always a good time to ask questions in the chat box. That's very helpful. I think Tiffany is posting the links to the current OES occupational employment statistics structure about our industry codes and our occupational codes. So thank you, Tiffany. So as I said, we're focusing on short-term, statewide occupational projections because many people find that information most actionable. And I know everyone would really like county-level data for short-term occupational projections, but research and planning does not publish this information because smaller sample sizes leave room for bigger errors. To be absolutely clear, there is no divination or fortune telling or magic involved in making projections. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics even makes clear in their methodology that projections should not even be considered forecasts. And then they go into all these details about the difference between projections and forecasts, which we are not going to get into here. We use a software creatively called Projections Suite, and Projection Suite uses data going back about 30 years. The quarterly census of employment and wages with data back to 1990, as we said in our Kahoot, is a major part of projections. And history is a major part, really, in any decision that we make. Think about trying to plan for the amount of Halloween candy you're going to need to buy. Perhaps, like some people in my office, you keep meticulous notes about how many trick or treaters come to your house each year, how much your household eats before Halloween night, how many people take a single piece of candy, how many people grab a handful, which type of candy are often left over at the end of the evening. For example, nobody really wants your Good and Plenty's, your candy corn, or your Black Twizzlers. And you've also kept notes, say, on how many families in your neighborhood have moved for work over the last year and how old the kids typically are when they stop dressing up for trick or treat. And so those Halloween candy notes are like the quarterly census of employment and wages. And keeping notes for 1 year is good. So um, check out this Wyoming employment, up and down on the side, Wyoming employment in thousands, averaged over the course of the year from the first quarter of 2017. So keeping notes for 1 year is good, but more time gives us more perspective. Take a look at employment in Wyoming going back to 2015. So 2015 to 2018, this is how employment looks. Maxing out kind of at 285,000 and dipping below 270,000 in 2017. 10 years, though, of Halloween candy information or employment information gives you even more information to go off of. And let's say, though, that you have lived in your house for a long time, you've paid it off, you've lived there for 30 years, you've taken Halloween candy notes. Those notes are the baseline for how you make all your predictions, just like how the quarterly census of employment and wages gives us this baseline to go off of. So, baseline employment all the way back to 1990 in Wyoming. So now imagine that you have a software that takes all those notes and gives you several different trick or treat or time series scenarios, like how Projection Suite does for our analysts at Research and Planning. The software tells you how much candy to buy if the forecast calls for snow, how much candy to buy if it looks warm, how much candy to buy if one neighborhood makes a group decision to hand out king size candy bars 1 year and that neighborhood is not yours. You buy the amount of candy for the scenario that you think is most likely, leaning possibly a bit conservative as we do at RMP, because if you're like me, you don't want that Halloween candy left over staring you, haunting you, staring at you, haunting you. And that's what we do at Research and Planning. We choose the scenario that is most likely given all the data that we have, and we don't do anything wild. Questions? Please do share in the chat box. Questions, comments, thoughts, anecdotes, stories. All right, so we use our Halloween candy notes over 30 years, basically using the quarterly census of employment and wages as our stock, expected changes in the economy as our veggies, time series methods as our meat, and analyst judgment as our salt and pepper. And we have our statewide industry projection stew with all of that mixed in. And it's from this pot that we ladle out the rest of our projections, especially our occupational projections. Based on the employment statistics survey, we know that the ratios of which types of jobs are done in each industry. For example, if a lot of roustabouts work in oil and gas, and if oil and gas is expected to grow, then there would be more jobs for roustabouts and service unit operators. And based on history, Research and Planning projected that there would be an increase of about 2,400 jobs in the oil and gas industry from April, May, and June of 2017 to the same time next year. About 800 of those jobs would probably go to roustabout and service unit operators based on the staffing patterns in the oil and gas industry. So, opposite of the mining industry in Wyoming is the contracting public administration or government industry. And as of the second quarter in 2017, Research and Planning projected that public administration would have 644 fewer people working in it in 2019 than it did in 2017. And given that the top three occupations, the occupations with the highest employment in public administration industry are patrol officers, correctional officers, and firefighters, Research and Planning projected that by April, May, and June of next year, there will be 76 fewer jobs for patrol officers, correctional officers, and firefighters than there were in April, May, and June of last year. Questions, comments, confusion? Really appreciate everybody who is using the chat box to let me know what they're thinking, who they're watching with. If you're just joining us, the chat box is the best way to ask questions throughout the presentation. Helps me keep track of where people's interests are, what I need to do to improve next time, and I really appreciate it. So if you haven't introduced yourself, as many of you already have, please do introduce yourself, who you're watching with, where you're from. I really appreciate it. Projections also use survey data in addition to that 30 years of Halloween candy trick or treat, quarterly census of employment and wage data. And the survey data is used to estimate why there are so many openings for a particular position. We know from our Kahoot that most openings don't come from the number of jobs newly available in an economy that didn't exist before. Most jobs do not come from growth. They come from exits and transfers, which can collectively be termed separations. Growth, while usually positive, does not have to be. It's the change in the number of people working in that occupations. Exits are basically people who do not trick or treat. They are not participating in the labor force, and meaning that they are not working and they are not looking for work. Transfers are people who change careers entirely. Perhaps mid Halloween night, they start handing out a completely different type of candy. They don't just switch from Snickers to Milky Way, they switch from candy with chocolate to things that you should not hand out to trick or treaters. In other words, if you are a combined food prep serving worker at McDonald's, it does not count as a job transfer if you start doing the same job at Burger King. And separations almost always play a much larger role than growth in influencing the number of openings for an occupation. And because of exits and transfers, you can have a lot of openings in an occupation that is declining. Tellers are a good example of this. There are projected to be 25 fewer jobs for tellers in Wyoming in 2019 quarter two, but there's still projected to be 214 openings between the second quarter of last year and next year. We publish our 2017-2019, we published our projections for 2017-2019 earlier this year. And one thing that can be very frustrating for people is they ask, why am I just hearing about 2017 employment projections in 2018? What good does this do me? And I hear ya. I understand that is frustrating, which is why it's so important to know how we collect this very high quality data. And after the end of every quarter, businesses report how many people worked at them for each month. It's a total census of businesses. It's not an estimate at all, and it's not really optional. Um, that means that the earliest that you could start collecting information for April of a given year is not until July. And then analysts have to correct and process the data. So information for April isn't available in a usable form until October of that year. So the earliest an analyst could start working on projections where the baseline was April, May, and June of 2017 is not until October of 2017. And there's a lot of detail, time, effort, and attention to privacy put into these projections, which is why you don't hear about projections that have a baseline of 2017 quarter two until 2018. As you're comparing Wyoming to other states, please do also remember that analysts in each state are making their own projections about their own state and territory. States and territories are using the same software, but they're likely basing their salt and pepper decisions about what they think is most likely to be true for their area. There are projections made at the national level. There are projections made at the national level, and these national projections are useful in their own way. But it would be like trying to trick or treat on November 1st if you just took the national projections and divided by 50 and hoped you got the projected changes for Wyoming. That's absolutely not how it works. Come to our website at Research and Planning and use that instead. Any questions, comments? We're about to move on to our next topic, which is how Wyoming compares to other states. Any thoughts? Confusion? Do chime in. I am reading. I am keeping an eye on who is sharing. Thank you. It's really important to remember that Wyoming is not an island. Depending on where you are, up to half of your workforce may be people who are not from Wyoming. I'm looking at you, Jackson. That's definitely true in Jackson, at least for a large part of the year. Research and Planning has data sharing agreements with everyone in all of Wyoming's border states, but because North Dakota's economy is sometimes compared very strongly to Wyoming's, I've decided to include them in our regional map. And as we look at the relative change projected for all occupations for 2017 to 2019, we can see that in terms of percent change, in terms of relative change, Wyoming tied Idaho for 19th place in terms of growth. However, Idaho's 2.7% growth constitutes a projected change of about 20,000 jobs, whereas 2.7% growth in Wyoming is a little under 8,000 jobs. Analysts in Utah and Colorado projected that their states would grow at a faster rate than states to our north and east. And remember that this is not growth per year, but over 2 years. And if you want average annual growth, divide by 2 at your own risk. Nationally, the fastest growing states and territories are the Virgin Islands, followed by Utah, and the slowest growing are Maine and Alaska, which are just barely above 0% growth, and then Puerto Rico, which is very much a contracting economy at this point. There are some occupation groups growing faster than the state averages in Wyoming, surrounding states, and North Dakota. And this is just growth. It's just the percent change, not the groups with the most number of openings. It's likely that you will notice more businesses recruiting for supervisors of construction and extraction workers, maintenance workers, food service workers, and supervisors, and some healthcare support occupations than in prior years. And this is probably true throughout the region. Anybody from out of state notice this? I know we have some people from Colorado and Illinois on. Anyone else? Anyone from around the state notice this? These occupations seem to be growing faster than average, faster than 2.7%, excuse me. Do chime in the chat box if you have something to share or a story representative of how this data does or does not represent what you're noticing. In our region, there are 4 other occupational groups that are growing faster in other states than they are in Wyoming. And so they're growing faster in all of our border states and North Dakota, except for Wyoming. And economies in other states are seeing a relatively greater emphasis on personal care workers, financial specialists, and health technicians and physical therapy aides than Wyoming. These groups, again, they're still growing in Wyoming, but they're not growing at the 2.7%. Wenlin just typed in the chat box that it's hard to compare among states if it's even comparable, if every state conducts their own projections. Is a summary of all states' projections higher than BLS's US projections? And Wenlin, I do not actually know the answer to that, and I'm not sure that anybody has published anything about that. There are certain advantages to having a unified look at the nation, but there also are certain advantages to having every state making like what they think is most appropriate for us, because Wyoming is one of those states, like as you know, Wenlin, but other people may not, is that it does not always tend, the economy does not always tend to follow the same walk or exactly what's happening in other parts of the country. So sometimes when other parts of the country are experiencing a downturn, Wyoming is doing just fine, and Wyoming can be experiencing a downturn, and other parts of the country are recovering. So I'm not sure where we would get that information. I don't think it exists a comparison of U.S. projections to a summation of all states' projections. So these occupations are the occupational groups that are growing faster in border states in North Dakota, and they are growing in Wyoming, but they are not growing as fast as average. There's different ways to rank growth. There's relative and absolute growth, and mostly we've talked about relative growth, but this map shows occupations that are at the intersection of relative and absolute growth. So they both have high percent change for each state, and a high growth rate and a high number of average annual openings. This sorry surprisingly to me, actually, is that there was a lot of overlap in terms of what were both the fastest growing and most occupations available each year in the other states. So, for example, in Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, personal care aides had a very high growth rate and also a very high number of average annual openings. For Utah and Colorado, application software developers fell at this intersection. And for Wyoming and North Dakota, it's service unit operators and oil and gas and mining. It's for Wyoming and North Dakota, service unit operators and then roustabouts, respectively, were the fastest growing occupations with also a high number of opportunities available each year. Colorado did was on its own. It showed a growth rate of 8.7% for electricians, or about 2,800 openings per year for electricians in Colorado. It's important to pay attention to what's going on in other states, even as Wendland pointed out, they cannot be directly compared. This is the best information that is available. And for electricians, for instance, between 2017 and 2019, Research and Planning projects about 300 openings a year for electricians in Wyoming, quite a few. But that's about 10% of the job openings that are projected to be available in Colorado each year. Now, I do not plan or execute training programs, but if I were, I would definitely be paying attention to what's going on in other states, and I would definitely also be paying attention to the wages in other states, which we are not accounting for here, but do regularly, in fact, impact people's choices in where they live and work. There's definitely some occupations where the number of people working in those fields is expected to be fewer in 2019 than it was in 2017. Occupations that are declining in Wyoming and at least 4 other states in the region are telemarketers, because now we have robocalls. Editors, there's fewer of those. Reporters, TV and radio announcers, and postal workers, mail sorters, fewer of those projected to exist in 2019 that existed in 2017. You'll also likely see around the region fewer floral designers, fewer correctional officers and jailers, and first line supervisors of correctional officers, medical transcriptionists, fewer data entry keyers, fewer meter readers. You'll see fewer of those, and that's kind of cool because that's I mean, it's not cool that there's fewer people working. It's cool because now they can use Bluetooth to read your meter as they drive by your house. They don't actually have to walk. Really interesting stuff. You also see fewer photographic process workers because now everyone has a digital camera in their pocket, just about. There are other regionally declining occupations like legal secretaries, for instance, but there are similar occupations that are growing, like paralegals. So if you're using data, make sure you're looking at the exact, precise, right occupation. Don't be comparing paralegals to legal secretaries. They're not the same thing. Make sure you're handing out Kit Kats, and not Kit Kat minis. Be specific about what you're looking at. Shannon Kerr from Colorado said that Colorado has a construction boom going on at the moment. Shannon, yes, that's definitely something that we talk about quite a bit in Wyoming, as well as the cost of housing in Colorado. And I'm sure that you people in Colorado definitely understand that. So something we keep an eye on too here in Colorado, because Colorado has just so many commuters that it exchanges with Wyoming in terms of workers. Thank you for sharing, Shannon. There are a few groups of occupations that are declining in Wyoming but growing in other states. For supervisors of protective service workers, firefighters and admin assistants, and electronic equipment repairers and installers, there are projected to be fewer jobs in Wyoming in 2017 and 2019, but a growing number of jobs of these in surrounding states in North Dakota. Remember that occupational changes are largely remember that occupational changes are largely driven by expected industry changes. And the first 3 groups here are largely employed in local and state government. And as we discussed, fewer jobs in public administration mean fewer jobs for protective service workers, fewer jobs for admin assistants. There are not any notable jobs or notable areas that are growing in Wyoming, but simultaneously declining in the rest of the region. So, questions, comments, and anything you would like me to go back over before we continue on. I'm about to move on to our third section. Deanna said, would you mention how a classification decision is made and by whom? Yes, Dina, this is, fascinating for people like me if you enjoy categorizing and organizing things. There's a big, they have like a big conference. It's through the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They meet every few years and they update everything. Check out those links that Tiffany posted earlier and you can kind of get a better idea. But if you do a internet search for the North American Industry Classification System or Industry Classification System and Occupational Classification System, you can pull up the whole book that classifies, for instance, about 850 different occupational classifications. And every few years, like I said, they're updated. So cool things are added each year. Like biotechnology did not exist a few years ago, and now that's its own industry. And there's actually several sub-industries. Genetic counselors were something that didn't exist in 2000, but now do exist in the 2008 occupational code, and we're up to the 2018 occupational code now. So yeah, it's important to make sure that you're using the most recent code or the right code for the right time frame you're looking at. Like if you're looking at statistics from 2000, make sure you're using the code from 2000. And there's a lot of crosswalks all available online for all of that. So thank you for the question, Deanna. Anything else? We'll move on to our last section. How can I use projections? We've talked about growing and declining occupations, but whether an occupation is growing or declining actually has basically nothing to do with how many openings are available. Most openings typically come from separations where people in the occupation exit the labor market or transfer jobs. And growth can be misleading because a position might be the fastest growing in the West if there was only one person working last year and now there's 3 or 4 people working in that job this year. But neither does looking at how fast something is growing mean the occupation is of major economic importance. There are many things to consider besides percent change or growth. In some cases, you may even see a need for occupational training, even if the number of people working in that occupation is declining from year to year. Before we get into this section, I do want to make clear what projections are and what they are not. Projections are not an estimate of training needs, nor a forecast of what will definitely happen. They are an estimate of what is a reasonable expectation based on what has happened in the past. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics thinks that projections are good for comparing industries and occupations relative to each other rather than in absolute terms, with a strong reminder that projections are in no way a suggestion of supply. They're in no way an indication of the workers that are already out there. Tiffany just said on our chat that 2018 saw a revision of the standard occupational classification codes, and 2017 the industry codes were revised. So they are revised, and typically they aren't revised majorly each year. They're just adapted to slightly, adapt to our changing industry and occupation. So as long as we're clear about what projections are and are not, we know that we can't just say, hey, look, geotech jobs are projected to grow much more than average. Let's get training. And while this is a data-driven statement, yes, from the 2017 levels, geotechs are expected to grow to 22.8% by 2019, which is a projected growth of 71 more jobs and 140 total openings for those 2 years. So yes, this is a data-driven statement. However, how many geologic and petroleum technicians are in the market but whose skills are not being utilized? I mean, I do not have numbers for this and there's no tracking of this, so don't go looking for information that doesn't exist. But off the top of my head, I could personally name quite a few people who could fill this role and have their skills better utilized. It's really important to consider a number of things before you start planning a training. First, how many openings are projected relative to other occupations? Be aware that short-term projections are made for a 2-year period. So the total openings, especially for how we report them at research and planning, are for the whole period. And if you're looking at data from other states, they may have already divided their short-term projections by 2 to estimate average annual openings. With information on growth, exits, and transfers, and a little time on a search engine, you can make a decent, educated guess about why people are leaving an occupation. Is an occupation declining because of changes in the structure of our economy, like photo processors? Are people aging and retiring and exiting the workforce at a higher rate than other occupations, as we often see with educators? Does this job provide high enough wages for newly hired people to support their family, or do people transfer out of this job to other jobs with some frequency? Does this job require training, or were the people who were already had this job before, who were displaced in a recent downturn, available for work? And maybe this applies to geotechs and petroleum engineers in Wyoming right now, and each area of the state is going to be slightly different. Maybe this job requires nothing but short-term on-the-job training, but depending on who you are targeting, you may find it critical to offer training, soft skills training, for jobs that don't require an education, but and don't require long-term or moderate term on the job training. But soft skills training, perhaps a training that people attend with some regularity, may be very useful to the customers you serve. There are a number of first line supervisor roles also that are growing faster than average in Wyoming and that are projected to have a lot of openings. But if you don't have any leadership credentials, it's difficult to make the leap into leadership. And good leadership requires constantly adapting to new technologies, new research, and a new workforce. Who are the workers who generally fill this occupation? Um, this is where national trends can really affect Wyoming. As I heard from a number of people at the workforce centers, if the people who often fill an occupation are not available in your area, even if you offer training, it is unlikely to alleviate the difficulty in filling those jobs. If anybody wants to share on this topic or any of these topics, please chime in the chat box now. I'm keeping an eye on it. So definitely something to consider is who works in this occupation and are those people available in your area? Just because an occupation is projected to grow quickly statewide doesn't mean it will grow quickly in your area. Projections are based on the past, and if in the past you have not had a lot of openings for an occupation in your area, it's unlikely that this will change. If you're thinking of planning a training, go ahead and talk to local businesses. Are there any trends in what they notice? What do business owners expect? And does this match up with the data that you have? Why or why not? There may be a very good reason, and there may be a lot of sense why what you expect does not line up with the data that you are seeing. I love talking with people at the local workforce centers because, as someone who works behind a computer, I get such a real perspective of what is actually happening. It takes about 2 quarters to collect, clean, process, and analyze high quality data. So by the time we at Research and Planning can take a look at what has happened, the people at the workforce centers already know. Like about how the labor market has really slimmed down in recent years and for Wyoming. And despite the fact that there are fewer people employed now than there were in 2015, it may be more difficult to fill jobs, especially lower wage jobs. The workforce centers can tell me that this has been going on all summer, and that things, some people have said that things haven't been this tight in recent and not recent memory, but these trends of labor market won't show up for us until months later. So if you know your area and you're looking at data, trust yourself. And I say and looking at data because sometimes we can let our expectations blind us to reality, and we can accidentally overlook changes because we're not expecting them. And the answer lies somewhere in the middle between what you are observing and what the data is showing. Oh, so yeah, are there any other questions that are important to ask? Great time to chime in and let us know what's going on. As I said, our office is exclusively a statistical agency, and we do not plan trainings or execute trainings. So there's a lot of questions here, and these questions are going to be different depending on what your agency's mission, vision, funding, goals, customers, business, and location are. These are questions to answer for yourself before you start planning a training. As we noted before, the fastest growing occupations and often the occupations with the most openings in the region are commonly cashiers, food prep, retail sales, and in North Dakota, it's truck drivers. And CDLs aside, These occupations typically require a fair amount of soft skills, but don't require an education credential of any kind and don't require more than a few weeks of on the job training. Many people have barriers to employment, and you may find it worthwhile to reach out and address those barriers in that way. But for the next few slides, we're going to focus on occupations that require training or education that have a lot of openings relative to other occupations. Some occupations may even be declining in certain cases, but we know people leave the workforce and transfer to other jobs, even in declining occupations. So, this is not a list of occupations that need training. This is not a list of occupations that need training. I am definitely not saying that this is a list of occupations that need training, but they may be some useful brainstorming ideas for you to consider for your own area and your own organization. I would also consider wages for your area at the 25th percentile level for certain occupations, openings and growth in other states, and wages in other states. I've omitted first line supervisors and management positions from these occupations. There had to be a certain number of openings, and there had to be they had to make it the 25th percentile at least $12.95 an hour, which is the 25th percentile for all occupations. And check the slide notes because for some of these I could not fit um, all the occupations that met this requirement on the slide. So, for occupations that don't require a formal education credential but generally require moderate on the job training, the occupations listed here had relatively more openings and higher wages. You can see in Wyoming, 3 of the 5 occupations here are almost exclusively employed in the mining, oil, and gas industry. And another interesting I noted was that service unit operators, roustabouts, and rotary drill operators had a higher exit and transfer rate than other occupations that did not require an education credential but did require moderate on the job training. People with a high school diploma who take an apprenticeship often have higher wages than average. And there are other occupations that require apprenticeships, but they didn't have as many projected openings. Carpenters are an example here of an occupation that is projected to decline by 0.3% or 11 jobs between 2017 and 2019, but where there are still a lot of openings during that same time period. Here I've listed 6 of the 17 occupations requiring a high school diploma and moderate on-the-job training, and wages that were at least as high as $12.95 an hour. And this list, not included here, but also you would find on this list with just slightly fewer openings, is included insurance claims workers, real estate agents, and pharmacy technicians, in addition to the welders and medical secretaries and inspectors and repair workers that you see here. These occupations require some college but no degree, or a post secondary non degree award like commercial driver's license. You'll also find in the show notes, you'll see that HVAC workers are on this list. Brenda Morgan said, "Can you explain again what the 25th percent means?" This is wages in the 25th percentile. So generally, what we find is that like people who start an occupation make less than the average or the mean wage. So I've taken the wages from the 25th percentile as defined by the Occupational Employment Statistics Program, which is what you're going to find generally if you use any basic search engine to look for, 25th percentile wages of an occupation for a certain area. And so I did not take the median or the average because a lot of people here are working towards getting people employed, and the wages of the 25th percentile, depending on how much experience that person has, may be more representative of the wages that one could expect initially. I hope that answers your question, Brenda. If not, ask again and I will try again. Tiffany shared another great mapping tool that compares wages and the quantity of employees in states based on occupation. It's also pretty cool if you like maps like I do. While the Bureau of Labor Statistics classifies registered nurses as an occupation requiring a bachelor's degree, I've included it here because nurses with an associate's degree are necessary to staff Wyoming hospitals, and they are by far at the top of this list in terms of both openings and wages. You'll also see that this list makes forest and conservation technicians quite a few openings, wages $14.11 an hour at the 25th percentile, But this is a declining occupation, and forest conservation technicians typically work in government, and a declining public administration industry means fewer jobs for conservation technicians. So we are just about to wrap up right on time. This is going to be your last chance to ask questions, chime in, share stories, share resources. But let's review. We've covered a lot today. We asked how projections are made, how Wyoming compares, and how we can use projections. And we know that projections are based on historic trends, and that Wyoming and North Dakota's industry is still driven by oil and gas, but that fast growing occupations for surrounding states include applications developers and personal care aides. And very importantly, we have been reminded a number of times uh, that projections are not an indication of training needs. Okay, so this is all of our sources. Before our last call for questions, I'd like to remind everyone that all of this is public information and you can download it here. And I know you can't click on your screen now since this is a screencast, but these slides will be available shortly afterwards, so you can click and do your own research. And remember that if you are interested in more of the SOC code, so you can look up exactly where everything is coming from. As I said earlier, it will definitely be in the comments on the given slides that I send out afterwards. So if there are more questions, now is the time. Check out this cute little dog, and let me know, what else can I answer for you. What else, what have you noticed about what's going on? I'll be here for a little bit, but yeah, I really appreciate everyone coming, and all the questions that everyone has been asking. If you need to get in touch, this is my contact info. Happy to have any feedback regarded to the presentation. So thank you so much. Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks for all your suggestions and for sharing the resources. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate your time. And let me know how it was. I will send out the chat transcript and the recording and everything else soon. So thanks, Shannon. And thanks, Tammy. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad that you found this interesting. Brenda, thank you as well for coming. Jessica, Wenlin, thank you. Thank you again as well. I'm glad you all could join. Gear, thanks, and hopefully get to meet you sometime. If anybody wants me to go back over anything, thank you as well, Sarah. If anybody wants me to go back over anything, I can definitely go back and check things with you. Thanks, Ty. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Feel free to give me a phone call if you think there was something that you don't want to discuss in the chat box, but you think requires maybe a more nuanced explanation. Happy to help with that too. Colleen, thanks so much, and thanks for your input when I was going ahead and creating this presentation. I really appreciate it.